forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. 20743256643 is not available. You may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hello, Senator David Woodsome. This is Seneca. I'm at 207-707-7329. And I am calling in regards to a conversation that I had yesterday with a lieutenant, and I believe he was a sheriff. And I was calling to get a job description title of a police officer and what their duties and respects are and stuff like that, if they, what their real job description was, as opposed to the authorized version that we get when we look at websites and articles on the internet, as far as websites and watching videos on YouTube and specific things of what a job description is as a police officer. It started to raise a lot of concerns. Did they swear an oath to protect and serve the Constitution? Which one? Is it the one of 1820 of the nation state of Maine? Or is it the one of the Constitution of the United States of America and Washington District of Columbia? Or is it the one that has been reformatted in the 60s and 70s of the legislature, which they did through the consent of the people, that they were going to make it more updated and do it for the benefit of the people, which is turning out to be more or less beneficial for the, other specific things that I'm not going to divulge into, because I'm not trying to defraud or fraud anything or, operate with prejudice. By the way, I reserve all rights delegated by God, protected by the Constitution, and recognized under UCC 1-308 without prejudice. So the reason why I'm calling is because the officer that I talked to, when we were discussing statutes and also rights, he made a point that I should probably contact legislation and try to figure out a way if we can institute a bill or something. And I had recalled in my studies of this about 8 years ago was that, I believe it was Thomas Paine or Thomas Jefferson said, we need to beware of judges and legislators, that they could rewrite the Constitution and institute laws that are tyrannical and not for the people, that then elevates the government above the choice and authority of the people recognized in the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. So, as we're progressing forward as a nation, a lot of people are not competent enough to understand these specific type of things to be able to try to be more preemptive, because I don't think about myself, I think about my children's children. Well, one of the reasons why I'm contacting you is because I noticed a bill called HB 507 FNA Local, and it falls under 507-FN-A-Local. It's relative to registration of commercial motor vehicles and operators / driver's licenses. This is out of New Hampshire. This bill restates the right to travel and requires the Department of Safety, which is what the police officer kept in stating that he is operating for, which is the Department of Safety. So who are they trying to keep safe? And who do they work for? Do they work for the state, or do they work for the people? When they say they broke a state law, does that refer back towards the laws of the Constitution and the remedies of the Bill of Rights? Or are these the flip side of the factor of kind of going into contract law, which is understandable? Again, I am not anti-law or anti-anything. I think that we all have a right. If you read the Fourth Amendment carefully, to me it says the right of the people to be secure in their houses, persons, papers, and effects. So it has people and persons in the same sentence. So what that is referring to me as is that there's a private citizen or a private individual or a private national civilian that can operate both in the private sector and has a right to also operate in his persons, which is a corporate entity, or the ego, the construct of self. And remember, God doesn't care about persons. So when we're dealing with the soul, we're dealing with the soul of the land again. And these are all things that kind of go in the variables of law. But what I would like to do is have this acknowledged in the state of Maine or the nation of Maine, and then we can proceed forward. We can proceed forward without having people violate their Fifth and Fourth Amendment right, which is them to be secure in all their property.
You have reached the maximum time permitted for recording your message. If you're satisfied with the message, press 1. To listen to your message, press 2. To erase and re-record, press 3.
Good morning, Senate Republican Office.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. Is this Senator David Woodsome's office of York County?
It is.
It's
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so yesterday I spent probably about 3 hours on the phone with individual police officers from York County to Cumberland County. It started off with me asking a general question, which was, what is the job description of a police officer? Besides the typical authorized version, which is, and then I asked them, I said, did they swear an oath to protect and serve the Constitution? They said yes. In order to be a police officer, do you have to swear an oath to protect and serve the Constitution? They said yes. I said, so that's job description number 1. And they said yes. Okay. What Constitution did you swear an oath to? Was it the one of 1820 of the state of Maine? Is it the Constitution of the Washington District of Columbia that covers the entire continental United States of America? Or is it the Constitution of the legislature? And he sat there and he paused for a good, I'd say 30 seconds. And he said, that's a really good question. And I said, thanks. So then we proceeded forward with the level of trying to educate the officer, because I've been studying law for 8 years, and I'm not going to take up all your time this morning of telling you my life story, but in a nutshell, what it really happened was in 2014, I was actually going to be a game warden, because I decided that if I was a police officer, I'd be around drunk people all the time, violent people, domestic violence, and all these specific situations that made me think, you know what, if I'm around the worst of humanity, it's probably going to affect my faith in humanity. So I decided I was going to be a game warden and protect nature, and I could see myself out there, really protecting nature. And if someone was actually hurting the ecological system of our nation, whether it was the state of Maine, could have been Florida, whatever, I would have felt more, how do I put it, respected, and I could sleep at night knowing I was protecting animals and wildlife. And if I charged somebody with a crime, then I felt like I would have been more reasonable and justified, rather than, because when I went to go be a game warden, they told me I had to be a police officer for 5 years. My teacher was an IA officer, internal affairs agent, and she started to tell me that we have rights, but a lot of police officers don't follow the Constitution. They enforce a lot of policies. And this really raised a lot of flags and inquisitiveness for me. And before I could proceed forward, my friend ended up taking his life. It seems to be a pattern. But anywho, it stirred me away from the law enforcement career, because I couldn't emotionally take on what was going on. And about 6 months after that, I ended up doing a job traveling the country, doing storm work, which what I mean by storm work is if there's a tornado, a hailstorm, anything like that. We go and restore your property back to the original state it was before the storm, and we worked next to insurance companies. Well, long story short, I got accused of public adjuster fraud and insurance fraud. I got arrested. For 2 years, I fought the case. After that experience with law again, the way that I beat the case opened up a doorway of where I started to see corruption in our legal department. And again, I'm not here to defraud anybody, but this started a rabbit hole for me of where I started to study the law, and I realized that as an American, you don't need a license to travel. And again, I've met other officers that said, you're absolutely right. And then I've met other officers that are young rookies, and they're like, no way, we're going to, immediately they took it all personal. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. I'm starting to see a major divide in our country as far as how people recognize their rights, as opposed to So I then got educated that there's two different Americas. There's one in 1871, where there was the original continental United States of America, and then after the Civil War, they created the government in Washington, District of Columbia, excuse me, and then created a separate form of government under a de facto name, or the same name as the United States Incorporated, and that there's U.S. citizens as opposed to citizens of this state. And I started to educate this police officer of this, and he's like, wow, this is really profound. Now I'm starting to understand why people believe the things that they do now. Because I guess he's dealt with people like me, but they couldn't articulate it as with a great foundation or as wise as I was. So a lot of people think that they're trying to get above the law. But if you read, a lot of the people pretty much are the law. Well, after the conversation, he started to tell me that I needed to contact legislation. He started to say that everything you're saying is right, but you need to try to figure out another way to approach this in a bigger way. Well, I remember Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson saying that if the people are not careful, the judges and legislators will create laws that are passed that give more rights and authority to the government than it does to the people. And eventually the people will lose their land. They'll lose their authority. They're going to lose their own original ownership of their own self, let alone the lands that they stand on. And then eventually every right will be converted into a crime. So my whole situation is that I understand that there's a difference between commercial activity and then non-commercial activity, which is where the rights are becoming more instituted, is where we're not operating in commercial activity. And so I brought it to his attention what a real person was, which is a legal entity. I let him know that a driver is one conducting commercial activity at a for-hire capacity. I let him know that operator under the general provisions of the statutes, the legislative statutes of Maine are still, once again, operators which are operating at a transportation capacity, which means they're collecting money for a fee. And he's like, well, let's say you're, okay, I'm respecting what you're saying now. So let's say you're an individual that gets pulled over. You don't want to give me an ID. You don't want to answer any questions, but you're doing 20 over in a residential area. We're getting complaints. How would you handle the situation? And he brought to my attention of what officers are running into when they can't enforce law on somebody that is choosing to not be a part of the system at all. They're not going to be recognized as, one, a United States citizen. They don't want to be, because that's where they're subject to all these new policies and laws and stuff. Whereas a state citizen, you're protected, but they're supposed to protect you. Like, that's literally what police officers are supposed to do, is protect your rights and make sure that you freely are able to do whatever you're doing as long as it doesn't injure or harm anybody else, So, and I realized that without the state ID, then he can't enact crimes. He can't actually enforce the statutes or those provisions. So I recognize that we're not above the law. We are the law. But if there's no corpus delicti, then how can someone get hurt? Well, the reason why I'm calling is because today I came across a bill that was instituted by the legislation of New Hampshire, which is under the HB 507-FN-A-local, as introduced in 2019 session. Yes?
Can you say that again?
Yes, no problem. It's the HB 501-FN-A-local. And then it's an act related to registration of commercial vehicles and operators / driver's licenses. And then it goes down and it says the analysis is this bill restates the right to travel and requires the Department of Safety. Because if they're protecting us, are they protecting the state? Who is the state? If he says he's enforcing state laws, then I want to know who the state is. And I thought he was protecting me, not the state. Well, I know a lot more than other people. And that doesn't make me better than anybody else, but it just makes it so I'm not going to... If I know something, that means I'm accountable. So I can either choose to ignore it, or I can take accountability and responsibility and not be subject to these things. And one of the things that I'm aware of is that there's there's the state of Maine, which is attached to the federal government, which is attached to the Ninth District of Washington, Columbia, because there's two Americas. There's the de facto, which is the federal government, and then there's the actual, real, true America. So when you're looking at the all capital letters state of Maine, they are issuing out statutes and codes to the citizens, which is the 14th Amendment citizens, under the federal jurisdiction. So when you're a state citizen, you're actually not really a resident. You are the nation of Maine. You're one of the people, which is recognized under the Fourth Amendment. It's recognized under Article 1 of the Constitution of the people of the several states. Several means separate, severable. And then so the people of the several states is the people that pretty much are the ones that created the Constitution, which created government for the benefit of the people. Does this make sense? I'm sure it does. So I don't want to make war with anybody. I'm coming in peace. And when I'm operating my private automobile, which is recognized under the Supreme Court as a household item, I don't want to be molested by a police officer violating my Fourth Amendment right. So I'm going to read this analysis again. It says, this bill restates the right of travel and requires the Department of Safety to provide at no cost to all non-commercial automobile and non-commercial conveyance owners a decal and identification card that states the holder is exempt from registering his or her automobile or other private conveyance under the superior authority of, I'd write this down, all capital letters, RSA 382-A:9-109 of the Uniform Commercial Code, which provides exemption for non-taxable consumer goods and household goods. The bill also repeals requirements for certain travelers or drivers to acquire non-commercial driver's licenses. And what this basically is saying is that the state will have to provide an identification, because that was what his concern was, is that, so, and I know that if I'm being detained or arrested, I only have to provide my name and my address. That's it. Whereas they believe that if you don't give them an ID, they're going to smash your window out, they're going to drag you out of the vehicle, tase you, beat you up, and treat you as a criminal for a victimless crime. And they say, well, you violated the state statute. Well, where's the victim? Because a real crime is either a body of evidence, a victim, a witness, someone who knows you were about to damage property, hurt somebody, or something like that. And then the other form falls under civil, which is contract. So we, as people...
Now...
Yeah?
Did that bill pass, or was it just introduced?
Yes, this bill is passed in the state of New Hampshire, and that's why I'm calling... Because at first he said, call the legislators, and I'm not going to lie, like... It's not that I don't believe in my government, but I believe that, do you guys have the best interest of the people, or is it the bankers, federal government? Who is the best interest for, especially with the legislators? And I think these are great questions. And another thing is that a lot of people are afraid of their government. So there's tyranny happening. But if a government fears its people, there's liberty. Well, I know many Mainers that I grew up with, when I talk about this stuff, they say, you're crazy. You're crazy, Seneca. You're going to get murdered by them. They don't care. So they're already, and I study the law. I've been doing it for 8 years. And if you study USC 18, 241 and 242, which I have downloaded right here, and it says in 18, crimes and criminal procedure under the United States Code. And if you go into 241, 242, I'm going to go in there right now so I'm not paraphrasing. But here's civil rights, 241. So if two or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws, and last I checked, this is a law, of the United States, or because of his having so exercised the same, or if two or more persons go in disguise on the highway or on the premise of another, with intent to prevent or hinder his free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege so secured, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both. And it says basically if death occurs, which we've seen this. We've seen, including kidnap. Okay, so that's a violation. Sexual abuse. When they grab me and throw me on the police officer and grab my balls, that's sexual abuse. Or attempt to kill. They say if you don't get out of the vehicle, we're going to beat you up. Is that not a threat? Is that not a threat? And so a lot of people don't know this. So when they're saying that they're afraid of the police, this is what they're afraid of. The next one is deprivation of rights under color of law. And again, I know these things, and a lot of people don't know these things. I believe it's God. I gave myself to God in 2012, 2013, and we're now in 2022. That's how I learned all this information. Is I believe the Holy Spirit brought me all this stuff over the last 8-9 years now. So 242 is deprivation of rights under color of law. Even officers don't even know this. Whoever, under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom. So whenever they say that you're violating a statute, that's under the color of law. That's not the Constitution. And therefore, how do you know that applies to me if I didn't contract in as either a U.S. citizen? There has to be a contract. And that's what they do when they say, well, you have the driver's license, or you're operating in this, or you're doing that. So because I know this, I am revoking all forms of anything that obligates me to this. But what I would like to do is create a bridge to where if you don't know about this stuff, I remember in 1997, they said if we are no longer protecting people under the Fifth Amendment right. If you don't invoke your rights, you don't have any rights. Your silence is acquiescence, which means your silence is your consent. So, and that's what they said around 1997. I don't even know if anybody remembers that, but I'm so glad they let me know. And then that let me know that whenever I get pulled over by a police officer, I invoke all these rights. That way, if anything they do against me, I'll let them beat me up. And then I'll go to court, I'll file a civil lawsuit. Why does it have to go down to us being beat up, having our property stolen, which is a violation of the Fifth Amendment right? So, anywho, I'm talking about the statutes, ordinances, regulations, or customs willfully subjects any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured. And the reason why I keep saying secured is because, well, I learned about secured party creditor. And that's where you take all your property, your social security number, your birth certificate, you put it in the UCC-1 financing statement under collateral, you give that to the clerk of courts, your record in the county, and now they have you recording your own self, which is securing your own rights, which is your property, because without property, you don't have rights. So I wonder, where does the state believe that they have rights over your property if it wasn't for the registration of your automobile? So me registering my automobile over to the state gives them rights to believe it's their property, which it's not. And again, not making war with anybody. I almost didn't even call the legislation because I still believe that they don't care about the people. Because Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine said, beware of judges and legislators, for they can pass rules and laws that alleviate the authority of the people and start to give more power to the government. Where, like right now, am I asking permission, or am I trying to bring a light of awareness from the government of the state of Maine, which is my nation state that I'm from, and it's where I want to be. So when I come, let's say I go to Florida for a couple of months, come back, I'm in my automobile. Should I be molested and unfettered? Does the rules in the Constitution supersede the states of the statutes that are being enforced? And if so, then they should make sure they're not violating the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment right. Make sure they have the status of the person that they're pulling over before they rip them out of a vehicle, because status is the number one thing that they should figure out. Standing, which is jurisdiction, and then adjudication. They don't do that. They already assume through tacit implied consent that you have already signed all your rights over to the government, which then gives them the right and privilege to pull you over, violating your Fourth Amendment right for no crime. Because if you didn't commit a crime, and they say, well, your vehicle not registered as a crime. But it's not. And in fact, I even have that written down. Where did I put that? Right here. I found this yesterday. Where was it? So that's my definition book. Where is it? Right here. So it says, right here, okay, exemptions. So there's the exemption. Enforcement. Questioning. Scope. Where was it? A traffic infraction may not be deemed for any purpose or penal or criminal punishment. That's interesting. So under 29A, statute 103.1, traffic infraction. A traffic infraction is not a crime, but yet they'll say that you just committed a crime. And then they'll pull you over, which I have a video of my friend, and I'm not making a complaint about that. It's already over and done with. I can't stop what happened there. But he got pulled over because he had a Regulation Z plate recognized under the Truth in Lending Act, which is for banks and a remedy. You have 3 days to cancel any contract. You have any right to be able to contract with people or not. So this is where they came up with the Regulation Z plate, which is recognized under the federal and also state codes and all those things. So we're trying to follow the law so that we don't get molested by these arbitrary laws that are repugnant to the Constitution. So anywho, he got pulled over for not having proper so-called issued plates by the state of Maine. He then wanted to know whether the vehicle was registered. He said that he doesn't have to register his property over. He now wanted an ID. I told him, well, actually, he doesn't have to. I told him to say, are you being detained? Well, you don't have to identify yourself if you're being detained because right now the police officer is conducting an investigation and I don't have to help the police officer with his investigation. So he wanted to identify the person, but he didn't have proof that he committed the crime. All he had to do was really give his first name. And the police officer couldn't really state beyond why he was pulling him over. Well, because he wouldn't give him an ID, the police officer started to rip at the handle. This scared the shit out of the guy. He told him, don't open the car. Don't contract with him. So he opened the car anyways out of fear. The police officer handcuffed him. He's like, well, who's a licensed driver and is going to ride this vehicle? And I was like, so wait a second. You're pulling this guy out of the vehicle for not having a registered vehicle, but now you want somebody else who's a licensed operator to come operate this vehicle. Why? So you can arrest him for an unregistered vehicle too? So right then and there, the police officer called a towing company. The towing company came with his wife and his children crying in the vehicle. They were made to walk home. They took the vehicle. They kidnapped him. He got bailed out. They made these charges against him, and he's going through all these procedures to be able to not necessarily be above the law, but not be subject to these statutes, ordinances, and codes under the color of law, but to be recognized and protected by as one of the people. Well, long story short, between those charges and then they put this against him, I was helping him develop all these cases. I was learning how to do a civil lawsuit, put a lien against a police officer. It didn't happen fast enough. He hung himself. So now he hung himself, and now there's nothing that can happen towards the situation, and it's completely tragic. And these officers are walking around doing the same thing to somebody else. That's the truth. And how many other people are just complying? So now that this is happening, so he doesn't die in vain, so they said this was a criminal act. And they said he was conducting a crime when it literally says right in their own statutes that it's not a crime under the enforcement. And inspect a driver's record of duty status. So there it is. Record of duty status and medical examiner certificate if applicable. This is under A2105. And then, so 29A, 105 enforcement. And then if you go to 103, I believe it was 103, where it talks about how a traffic infraction is not a crime. So they're under the impression that it's a crime, but it's not a crime. And they say that if you don't register your vehicle, you're breaking the law. It's a crime. So am I a criminal? And that's basically what they're saying, is that we're all criminals out here. So that means that they, when they look at people, go after people under the color of law, presuming that they're conducting a criminal activity which is protected under the Constitution. May not say driving, but under the 9th Amendment it says all rights enumerated, which means it's not written down. It doesn't have to be written down. And then if you look at the 5th Amendment, the right of life, liberty, and happiness, the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I apologize. The 5th Amendment says life, liberty, and property. And in the 14th Amendment, even though I'm not a 14th Amendment citizen, it still says life, liberty, and property. So if I own property, does that give the state right to then stop and accost me and violate my 4th Amendment right when I have not committed the crime? And so unless I assign my vehicle over to register to the state for commercial activity, which means that I'm conducting I'm acting at a commercial activity for hire, transportation use, which means I'm collecting a fee. So the reason why I'm calling is because I would like the state of Maine to recognize... Are you still there? I apologize. I know I'm ranting.
Yep, I'm here.
So now, after I have totally... And I hope this is not falling on deaf ears. If you recognize HB 501, House Bill, basically, 501 FN, a local, and then how they were able to pull that out was RSA 382-A:9-109 of the Uniform Commercial Code, which provides exemption from non-taxable consumer goods and household goods. And the bill also repeals requirements for certain travelers and drivers to acquire. Oh yeah, and how it all started was because he's a national, he didn't want to register his vehicle to the state. His landlord wanted to give him a parking permit, but would not give it to him unless his vehicle was registered to the state. I said, prove that we need to do that. Give us the authority that we have to do that. That's how it all started. And then the police officer pulled him over. His vehicle wasn't registered then. And so if we're not conducting commercial activity and our household item, which is recognized, I mean, I can do this all day long, which I'd rather not. But if you want me to, I will tell you every case law that proves that an automobile is a household item. Yeah, and that I also have case law that the Supreme Court ruled that we do not need a license to travel. But I still think that the state, if it wants to work for the people, needs to create an exemplified identification as a non-commercial, a non-legal entity. It's called an ens legis, which means a creature of law. And when you look at the ens legis, what they're saying is that they created the person, which is attached to the ID, because it's their identification. I need to see your ID. Well, it's actually your ID, because the state made it. And I'm technically not that person because I'm not my name. My name is given to me. It's personal property. It's an appellation, which means it's separate from me. So when they say, I need your name, that's technically my property. And it's through my consent whether I want to give that to you. And it's whether I really, truly did something wrong. Now, I get it. There's good cops. There's bad cops. You go into a classroom. One kid chooses to not listen to the teacher. And it's up to the teacher whether she wants to reprimand that person individually or reprimand the whole entire class like they're a military. Because in the military, if one person does something wrong, the whole troop and regime suffer the consequences. Is that how we should treat every American? Is that when one person does something wrong, it punishes us all? Or should we go after one person individually based off individual specific attributes per case? And I think that's how it should be. Even though... and then based off the law and with the Supreme Courts or the rulings fine, like the Terry and the Ohio case stops with the violations of right now I'm trying to figure out, I learned about it. There's I think a 2014 case of where a police officer did not see the crime take place, so therefore he can't arrest the person even though the person wants the person to be arrested. Because the police officer didn't see the crime take place, he can't arrest the person. He can issue him a citation. He can give him a paper arrest, like he's been arrested but then released on paper, but he can't actually physically arrest the person. And at first I was like, well, that's bullshit, because if somebody punched me in the face and I call the police, well, they didn't see the crime, so they can't arrest the guy. But they can issue him a citation and all these other particular things. So at one hand, I think that's ridiculous, but on the other hand, maybe that's beneficial for me later on down the road. Maybe I might get into a situation where, I consciously am aware of myself. I ask myself, why do I feel the way that I do? If I get mad at you because you swore at me, I'm going to ask myself, have I ever swore at people? Why do I resent myself for you swearing at you? And why am I judging you? And then I'll process the emotions and I realize, you know what? You're allowed to swear at me. I don't care. That's on you. But how many other people do that? Probably not a lot. And again, what I would like to do is figure out a way, how can we get somebody of authority, like a legislator or a senator, to recognize this bill that's passed in New Hampshire so that free Americans that choose not to be owned by anybody. Because if you look at an ex post facto law, okay, and the definition of an ex post facto law, and then the definition of statutes, statutes, let's go ahead, and what I noticed was that statutes were created for, hold on, is this my dictionary? No.
So, I mean, we would have to look at how that would fit into Maine law. You know, it's a New Hampshire law, not a Maine state law. I don't know if there's something similar in Maine law or not. We would have to look into that.
Well, it's more or less
if there isn't,
a house.
how would it fit in with our laws?
How does it fit in with New Hampshire and then doesn't fit in with it? Because it's a right to travel that then becomes restated. So,
yeah.
There's
just a lot we would need to look into, which, you know, we can definitely do. What was your name, sir?
Okay, my name is...
if you're willing to give it.
Yeah. The Living Man, so that's my real name, The Living Man, Seneca, Lee, Siebert, superscripted copyright symbol. So it's The Living Man, it's my real name, The Living Man, Seneca Lee Siebert, superscripted copyright symbol. So, one of the things I noticed...
And where do you live?
I live inside
myself.
myself.
Maine, or are you in New Hampshire?
I live inside myself. I am domiciled, or at least I get mail, and I pledge my allegiance to the nation state of Maine. So I'm a national of Maine, if that makes sense. So I live inside myself. I don't believe in residency, for the word res means property or thing. And then ident could mean identified or indentured. And I choose not to be an indentured thing. I'm a living man. I have a soul and a consciousness, and I am able to, function as men do, if that makes sense. And I'm one of the people, so therefore I have a right to, create laws, and we institute government. That's what we do, and then we ask the government to, under, I believe it's, Section 19 of the Maine State Constitution. Basically, Section 2 is the all powers inherent by the people, which, again, I'm not trying to be cocky or arrogant or anything. I just believe that, we as the people are the authority, and if we choose to give that up, that's a consent of the people to operate that way. But I've been studying law for a long time. I lived down in Florida for a while, and being from Maine, reading their Constitution, they almost mirror the Constitution of the United States of America, whereas the Constitution of Florida does not. In fact, Florida is owned by Washington District of Columbia. It's a federal zone completely. So it doesn't have the same rights as the people in Maine at all. But I believe it says, Yeah.
So you want us to
Section
see
11
how
says the legislator shall pass no bill of attainder, ex post facto law, nor law impairing the obligation of contracts. So people are contracted in with the state, with the federal state. That's where they get their license. Where can we get where there's no ex post facto law through consent? Because the ex post facto laws are falling under the statutes that the legislators are passing. And then this is where it's turning regular faxing, what was once innocent and not a crime, is now becoming a crime under the ex post facto law. And that's what legislation is passing, is ex post facto laws. And that's what I explained to the police officer yesterday, and he's like, huh. And I was like, so are you serving the Constitution of 1820, or are you working for legislation? It says in Section 2, Article 1 of the Declaration of Rights, all powers inherent in the people, all free governments are founded in their authority and instituted by for their benefit. And they have, therefore, an unalienable and indefeasible right to institute government and to alter, reform, and totally change the same when their safety and happiness require it. That's what I'm doing right now. This actually is not for me. You can title me as the people of Maine. I'm the people of Maine. I'm not just Seneca. Seneca really is, like I said, it's just a name. So you take the name away, who am I? I'm the people. So this isn't for me. This is for my daughter's children. And all the children that are right now in SAD 55, in Sockabee Valley High School and junior high, they don't know that somebody else there is looking out for them. That's what I'm doing. This is not for me. I'm going to die one day, and it could be any minute. So what about the people that believe they live in a free country and then find out, well, you're only free if you pay the fee? That's not right. That's not right at all. And so, again, I'm not trying to argue. What I think should be done is that if you guys are passing statutes and legislation and want to benefit the people, and then there should be houses and bills that are passed for the people that if they choose by knowledge and recollection are able to self-determine who they are and function as a proper peaceful citizen, or at least state citizen, a national of their declared allegiance state that they, whether they were born in it or not. I was born in Beverly, Massachusetts, but I came up here when I was 9. It turned out my family owned property up here long before I was ever born in Mass. And it also turns out that Maine used to be Massachusetts and also a part of Canada and Newfoundland. And then we broke away and began to set up our own charters under an insurance policy to the people. And this is where trusts come in, that if you're born, then you have a birthright to where your government has a trust and a share within you, and we are the administrators and beneficiaries of that trust. And then eventually we got switched and flipped, I believe, through the bankruptcy of 1933, of where the government became the administrators and beneficiaries and the people are the trustees. And so we're being kind of manipulated and bossed around. And right now we're in a position where if we're not careful, like I said, if you don't have property, you don't have rights. So you should ask yourself, do I own myself? Seriously. And then do I own the land that I'm standing on? And am I looking out for the children 30 years from now, another couple of generations? Because if not, the way that the country is going right now, I do not recognize them as my president. They're from a whole separate form of government. My governor that I elect is the president of the state that goes down to Washington, D.C., and then dictates and talks to them. The senator, I believe, is to basically take over all the counties and the local areas and hear out the people in those local areas. Am I correct?
Yeah, so just so you know, Senator Woodsome, I don't know where you get your mail, or if you're registered to vote somewhere, but redistricting took place in Maine this year, so I'm not actually sure who is running to represent you, but until after the election, new
well, I'm a national, so right now
legislation isn't submitted until after the election. So I don't know who would be the person to submit that, but certainly as we get closer or following November 8th, I would think that would be a good time to touch base again.
Well, I'm revoking my registration to vote and becoming an electoral voter, which is an electoral. So we elect people. We don't vote for them. Slaves vote for whoever it is, their rulers. Okay. We elect representatives. And so, I'm
just letting you know that legislation isn't being submitted right now. David Woodsome is termed out.
Okay.
And I don't know who will be filling that seat that would be submitting legislation is what I'm trying to say.
So this bill that I'm bringing to your attention, you're saying won't be submitted or even looked at right now while people are going through, a new seating of office?
I will certainly look into it, but yeah, the person you had called about, David Woodsome, so I'm guessing he serves the area where, you get your mail. He's not running for the Senate again. He's termed out of the Senate.
Okay. What's his, am I allowed to ask why, or is that none of my business?
We have term limits in Maine.
Okay, so every 2 years?
And so he's termed out. Senators and representatives can serve 4 2-year terms. Mm-hmm. 4 consecutive 2-year terms, which he has done.
Okay, so right now we're waiting on a new representative.
Exactly. So I get what you're saying and how you want to, maybe make this New Hampshire law, one in Maine, but I don't know who will submit that.
I know it's not going to happen overnight.
Until after November 8th.
Okay. I know it's not going to happen overnight,
and so, I'm not a senator, though. I wouldn't be the person who would make the call whether it gets submitted or not. That would be the sitting member.
What's your name again?
My name's Ashley.
Ashley. It's a pleasure to speak with you, Ashley.
Yeah.
So
what I'm saying is I would recommend that you call back after the election, and then we'll know who that senator will be and can further this conversation to see if they'd be willing to submit this legislation.
is there other people that you can suggest? Because I know that the only reason why I called this senator is because I called the general info of the legislation and then the senators, and then they asked me what senator was in my area, and I thought for a second Janet Mills, and I was like, wait a second, that's the governor. And then I looked and I realized we have 35 senators, and then there's 2 Yorks, and there's Saco out there, and then Leamington, and then there's out here in Parsonsfield, Cornish, and these specific areas. And this is where David Woodsome came up, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to call, because I actually am over here in the Limerick area, Cornish, and South, in North Parsonsfield and Hiram areas. But I think once you get in the Hiram area, now we're talking about a different jurisdiction, Oxford County, I believe. So,
right,
staying over here in York. So here's my question. Even though this bill is passed all the way out through New Hampshire, which I find to be extremely impressive, that there's people out there that are fighting for freedom pretty much the same way I am, that bill got passed. Okay, what avenues do you possibly suggest that I take to keep kind of fanning the flames on this, and then maybe bring awareness to many people? Should I call the governor? Should I call the Secretary of State? Because I think I made the first step, which is calling David Woodsome, who's a part of the Senate. Is he a part of legislation?
Yeah, I mean, he submits legislation, but he's termed out, so he can't submit legislation anymore.
So everyone's termed out right now?
He's termed out of the Senate. Not everybody. David Woodsome is termed out. Not everybody is.
So what you're saying is that anybody within this area right now, I will not be able to convey this information to. So what if I tell you that...
You can, but everybody is either up for re-election or is termed out. There are plenty of people who are seeking re-election. Senator Woodsome, however, is unable to seek re-election to the Senate because of term limits.
What is the steps to run for senator?
There are other people that can that are running for re-election for different seats.
What is the steps to run?
I would.
So what were you about to say? I'm sorry. What were you about to say?
I was going to say, I'd encourage you to reach out to the governor's office and follow back up with our office after the election, and then we'll know who's going to be representing that area and can chat with them about submitting this legislation. Okay. All right. So I'm happy to give you the governor's office if you would like that number.
Yeah, let me write this down. I'm
Sure.
going to go ahead and get my pen. I don't know what I just did with it. Bear with me, a little patience. Yeah, I'm not upset. I'm trying to understand my emotions and what I feel like. What do I feel like? I don't know. I think I feel like I'm trying to ask permission for something rather than trying to shine light on something so we can make positive change for everyone, not just myself. And I'm trying to figure.
And I'm just telling you that this particular individual is not going to be serving in the Senate again, and so he wouldn't be able to submit legislation as a state senator.
Okay, and you know what? I respect that, and I thank you so much for letting me become aware of that information deeply.
Yeah.
So basically, it's not that nothing can get done, it's just that this particular senator can't do anything.
Correct, yes, because he's termed out of the Senate. Yep.
Okay, so Janet Mills' number, that's who we're calling, right?
Yeah. 287.
287?
Yep.
So 207-287.
3531.
Okay, and all right, thank you so much. So is it?
Of course.
Should I call other senators or not?
I would encourage you to wait until after the election, because until we know, everybody is The entire legislature is elected every 2 years. So we don't know who's going to be in any seat.
I have a question. Can I enact that bill from New Hampshire to protect me here in Maine when some of the general provisions that are mentioned in the in the Maine statutes of the legislation mention partnership with New Hampshire? And I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
It's possible that a senator could. I don't know how that would work, but again, I would encourage you to reconnect after the election when we know who will be serving and who could submit legislation.
Okay. Well, I'm getting basically, I'm not sure of the legal term and then lawful term to use specifically that doesn't entrap me into the language, because the language is copyrighted, and a lot of the terms that we use in legalese is what binds us. So there's two different definitions of a motorhome in the general provisions. One is basically is to be classified where it has human inhabitants, and then the other one seemed more like a commercial kind of entrapment, if you will, the commercial terms. So if I own a private automobile that I'm going to live in, because a lot of people go to work, to go home, to go back to work, to go home. Is that a life? And so when they go home, they pay bills, and then they just stay at their home, and they don't really go anywhere. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to live in an RV. I'm going to start an online business, and I'm going to travel. And I'm going to live in my home like I'm going to work every day, but just travel. So that's my plan. And I would like to live in my automobile. I'm Abenaki Native American. I want to go forage for my food, that if a police officer sees me out there, he waves to me. He doesn't pull out a gun and shoot me because, I don't know, I'm fishing and foraging for food, which should be my natural born God-given right. So I'm enacting my God-given rights without being molested and unfettered. And between Florida, which that's where my daughter lives, my mom, she's down there in the hospital, and also living in Maine, which is my origin. I have family up here. They have property in the state. I'm helping them become nationals and free themselves. They're not going to do anything if they don't see. They're afraid that they're going to get shot. Well, now that they start to see me doing these things, they're actually starting to be like, wow, it's really happening. I can't even believe you're doing this, Seneca. That's crazy. So I'm helping them by them watching me take the example to free myself, which then will give them the bravery to do the same thing, which then I think will bridge the gap between this idea that the government's bad and that police are bad, because they're not bad. You guys work for us.
Sir.
Yeah?
I'm sorry to let you go. I am late to a meeting that was supposed to start at 9:15.
I understand, Ashley. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful morning.
Thank you, sir. You too.
So after the election, you recommend. Thank you so much.
Yep, exactly. Thanks.
Take care.
Have a good day.
You too.